some folk of Alexander, and some of Hercules, of Hector and Lysander, and such great names as these. But of all...
Hello and welcome to this Battlemech presentation. Today we're going to be going over the VTR series Victor. I did put a picture of Victor and Davion there just for the fact that he did pilot one of these at the start of his career. Not for very long, to be honest. But it's also that he is one of the most recognizable historical figure in the late 31st century, whose actions have had repercussions up until now, I would say, as of 3150s. So the Victor is an assault mech in the 80-ton range. We're going to go over the specifications of the machine, some of the advantages, some of the inconvenience, and I will posit that the Victor is potentially a failed experiment. I do have to say that I've been using the Victor quite a bit recently. Well, saying that, I've been piloting it a little bit, getting it into the yard, and fixing it here and there. And it never really let me down, but it never was a major force changer. It was there. It made people scared that there was an 80-ton battle mech on the field, but that's about it. There are some configurations that are better than others. We'll go over all of that. Let's start from the start as usual and speak of when the Victor came into being. It was a mech designed for the Reunification Wars, so SLDF and friends versus the periphery, and it was, at the time, one of the rare assault mechs. I mean, you didn't have huge swaths of different options back in the days, so the Victor was one of those early battle mechs. It has early battle mech everything written on it, actually. Just the format of the machine, if you don't have one of the fancier modern body kits for it, it's nothing fancy. It looks better than the Mackie. It's less bulby and bulging, more streamlined. But if you look at that early, very early 26th century, there weren't that many mechs running around still. It was a mech that was built for the SLDF line regiments. It was not built for the Royal Regiments. It was not built for Special Forces. It was built for the average Joe Star League Defense Force units. And it, as such, it's a design that survived really well into the Succession Wars because nothing fancy was built on it. And a lot of the parts were easily replaceable. You didn't have a fancy engine, very standard power plant. All the weapons are very basic, off-the-shelf equipment. The armor is standard. The chassis is standard. You don't have any fancy electronics. It does what it's supposed to do at a price point and at a logistics chain point of view, which is very simple. Another advantage was that it was sold to literally every member state of the Star League, which means it was spread all across the inner sphere. And when the Exodus happened at the end of the Maris Civil War and the start of the Succession War, a bunch of them were taken away by the remains and remnants of the SLDF. So what's a Victor in the end? Well, it's the 80-ton small end assault mech. So it's a fancy heavy mech or a small assault mech. It's also on the faster end of assault mech with a 320 rated fusion engine. We go to a speed of about 60 kilometers per hour on a straight line. And as any good mech, it can go up, down hills, no problem. It can go across fields, no problem. Rocks, whatever you throw at it. Another big advantage of the Victor is the fact that it does carry a set of jump jets, allowing it to get in and out of fights really quickly and really well. Makes it a very, very decent infighter in city fights or in things like canyons or mountainous areas. Gives it a lot more mobility than a lot of other assault mechs, especially at the time where it was released, where jump jets were not a prevalent thing, and there were no real assault mech with those jump jets. It's got a lot of mobility, but it's a bit on the soft side. You got 11.5 tons of standard armor covering the body. Of course, it's really easy to get ferrofibrous armor to replace that, especially since there's plenty of room in the standard Victor chassis for it. So if you're a repurposer, you'd probably be able to do that. This is comparable to our ZEU Zeus series, which is far more common in the Steiner space. And it's more than the laughable CGR series Charger. So it's decent enough, but not large enough to really make it one of those tough frontline units. Compared to many battle mechs of its eras and even nowadays, the Victor is not meant as a support unit, but it's really a close-range combat unit in the knife fighter category that I usually bring up when talking about that. You can also use it as a cavalry unit thanks to its jump jet. It can be used for flanking maneuvers, but since it's not the fastest mech around, you'll only really be able to do that, like we were saying, city fights, very efficient in these kinds of situations as a cavalry unit. The modern role a lot of people use this mech as a command mech really comes from the fact that during the Succession War, this was often the biggest thing commander could pilot, and in the hands of a good pilot, it could do great things, and a lot of commanders in that era were of that particular quality here. A good pilot, even with its limited armor here, will be able to keep it in a fight for a good duration thanks to its mobility, and with 15 regular eat sinks, it will overeat, but not as quickly as many mechs in its categories. If you just jump around and shoot everything every time, you'll probably end up with some eat issues. But if you're conservative and you know when to shoot the big gun and when to shoot everything else, you'll probably be doing fine. So does it have a punch? Well, it does in the end, because it does have one fist. So you can easily use it as a melee attacker. It can easily do dead from aboves with those 4 jump jets. Never something that I recommend. It's a bonehead move most of the time, but every once in a while it'll succeed and be a fantastic situation. Outside of that, you get a massive Pontiac 100 AC-20 class, which is the strongest mech-sized weapon you can really build in a mech until, let's say, the AG 3040, MRM 3040, but most of those, if you look at it, those are cluster weapons rather than a single effect. It has 3 tons of ammo, so you can stay in the fight for a decent amount of time, but you do have to be a little bit careful. Earlier model and some models that have been repaired in the field, let's say, might have some ammo feeding issues. It can jam, like most Pontiac 100s. It has been seen in Solaris arenas. If you watch the old match with Justin Xiang Allard, you will see a Pontiac 100 jam on a Centurion rather than a Victor. Same kind of situation can happen if you're not careful. It is coupled with a pair of medium lasers on the other arm, which means you can't punch and shoot all the primary weapons at the same time, because it's going to start getting a little bit off. But you can punch and shoot the AC-20 at the same time, which is very good. And you've got an SRM-4 rack in the torso, which gives you a bit of crit-seeking ability, which is pretty nice. Or you can use it as Inferno missiles if you want to try to get the other guys eat up. Acid missiles. I mean, you've seen all the things you can do with SRMs. Nowadays, it gets rather crazy. Back in the days, during the Succession War, it was one of those things that could pretty much kill whatever it got its hands on, except if it was a bigger assault mech. Things like an Atlas will outshoot a Victor, but if the Victor gets its hand on, let's say, a Zeus, a Charger, obviously, even some of the larger ones, things like the Cyclops. The Cyclops also has a 20 class autocannon, but it has this, I think, less armor than a Victor in the end. So balancing things out, if you were within 270 meters of a Victor, you are probably going to regret it. This is basically the common model you're going to see, the VTR-9B. Was there a VTR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? In development phase, more than likely. The 9A existed before the 9B. And what was a 9A? Well, it's a thing that you might see pop up every once in a while. There's a few refit kit that exist because some people decide to go with the 9A. The 9A took off 3 tons of the already 10 armor. So you're at 8.5 tons of armor, which is not a lot of an assault mech, and you get a machine gun, ammo, and a pair of flamers. It's an extra city fight variant in a way, and it will work fine until you actually get ambushed by infantry and they start shooting you back, which will happen in city fights. Yes, you would be able to torch the building they're hiding in if you manage to turn around in time. The 9S1 is a bit of a refit of that. You take out the flamers, you put another machine gun in, and you put some of the armor back on. This is a bit more sensible, and you'll actually see more of that particular model running around. Let's face it, if you're in the periphery, you're in areas where you won't be meeting any very heavy issues, you will probably like that model because of its anti-infantry capabilities. There was no official upgrade kit in the SLDF Force for the Victor, even though it was used throughout the period where such upgrade kits did exist for most mechs. What happened when modern standards came around, finding the Elms core, evolving the technology with NICE, and Comstar not being able to repress everything in that era, House Davion and Kurita had factories for the damn things. Davion more than Kurita, but both of them did. And both of them went to the exact same conclusion with the 9D and 9K model. And this is the standard refit you're almost going to see everywhere else. You take the AC-20, take it out, and you put a Gauss rifle in instead. You take out short-range punch to give you very long-range abilities, which does turn the Victor into a better support command mech, like most people were using. So this makes it a very smart refit, and something that is much better in cavalry capacities, while making it a little bit less of a knife fighter. On the 9K and the 9D model, you also replace the medium laser with medium pulse lasers. The inner sphere version of those are not that great. I've seen people do the refit kit using a clan version of those, and this makes the Victor genuinely wonderful. And they do stick more armor on it, about an extra ton. This is, overall, take a very good, even though I think it's flawed design, make it better in almost every way. House Steiner, when they had to deal with their own Victors, what they did, they didn't take the extra armor because they probably thought it was silly because their scout squads were already big enough, didn't need that much more armor. And they replaced the 4-rack with a 6-rack for the SRM. Very reasonable upgrade as well. It does what it's supposed to do. House Liao, of course, decided to Liao the model. They did what they want to do with the 10L. We still have a Gauss rifle. We have 3 ER medium lasers, which is, I think, a better setup than those 2 med pulse in many cases. You get a Streak 6 rack, which is very accurate, makes it very nice. And you stick an ECM and stealth armor on it, because an 80-ton sniper is a great thing to have. It's actually a pretty smart design, and I really like how sneaky it can be. In a way, with those ER medium laser, that Gauss rifle, you can actually ambush things very well, and it's not terrible in that role. House Davion, once again, kept going with the Victor. They had a ton of them, and they liked the idea of making it a sniper that House Liao did, but they don't have stealth armor as readily available and such, so they went in a different direction. They put a light engine in, which is good, but makes the mech a little bit more fragile because it's larger and takes space in the sides, but it has more armor and has the same mobility. But in this case, they went full sniper. A pair of ER large lasers and a rotary AC-5 able to shoot quite a bit of lead in quite a short period of time. You still keep that SRM-4, not quite sure why. They probably could have swapped things around. Well, in terms of heat efficiency, probably a little bit better. So this was what the Davion people decided to do with the Victor recently. Of course, then you go to the point where things get a little bit silly and you get some of those dumb periphery models. Because one day someone realized that putting a big-ass cleaver or huge bitchin' sword on a Battlemech was cool and efficient, and that's the kind of thing you really only see in the periphery or in Solaris. The VTR-9B, which is the, well, can't say it's a standard model, but you will see some of them floating around, turns the AC-20 into a smaller AC-10, which has less chances to jam. Actually, it's an advantage. Take off one of the medium laser, but you stick a huge-ass sword on it in the remaining Victors, and so it's fun. Then you get modernized version of the 9B, which add letter at the end or just change the name altogether. I've seen versions with triple strength myomer that put the AC-20 back in, you put an XL engine with a supercharger. In the end, remember, it's not the sensible option, but it's the periphery option. And it works. Triple strength myomer, an AC-20, and a big-ass cleaver on a Victor is going to cause trouble. What about the clans? We did say that the Exodus people took a big chunk of Victors with them, but they really didn't do anything with them. What you might see is a few Salama units, second line, people doing garrison duty using Victors. You'll see that it's very surprising that they replaced the AC-20 with a Gauss rifle. Medium lasers are generally ER medium lasers, so you've got more range and a bit more punch, and a Streak SRM-4 rack rather than a regular SRM-4 rack, which is good for ammo economy. If the pilot is lucky, the engineers in the tech will have been nice and have put 2 tons of armor more on it and changed the body kit a bit, but that's about it. You're not going to see a Victor 2C, you're not going to see completely refurbished Victors driven by crazy clan pilots. This is a thing that is going to be on the back end and show up if you raid some areas, which is a thing that I don't always condone. There is also a modern evolution on the design, which is really a case of someone's lucky you can't sue people over a weapons platform. What you have is the LN-4B Lu Wei Bing, which is a completely distinct and entirely different mech from the Victor because it's at 85 tons, and honestly that's it. It has the same speed, it jumps as far, it's built around literally the same roll as the original one, but it does have a lot of advantages. It's built on 16 tons of armor, so it's a big jump. You got a reinforced cockpit, which is pretty nice. A lot of people discount it, but it does make a big difference. And rather than the Pontiac 100, you've got an LB-20X autocannon, which is more durable, doesn't jam, and allows you to have at least a set of either slugs and cluster ammo, so you can use it as a shotgun. This is done using a light engine, so it's still a bit more fragile than a basic Victor in terms of what you can get blown off your mech, and endo steel, so you've got that. The LB-20X is really short range, so the rest of the equipment is a pair of light PPCs. It has as much punch as those medium lasers, shoots further, but you can't shoot when you're really in close range, and a 5-rack of multi-missiles with enough stock to put a ton of SRM and a ton of LRMs, so you can flip it on the fly. Honestly, it beats the Victor in every category, in my opinion. It's just a better mech with a more defined role. Well, why do I keep saying that the Victor kind of fails in its role? Well, here's one of the reasons. Here we have the HBK 4J, 4G. 4J exists as well, just so you know, which came out of factories in 2572. Yes, it's about 70 years later, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still a 500 years old mech. Its armament is an autocannon 20, a pair of medium lasers, and a small lasers. The Kaliyama also has a tendency to not jam, which makes it a little bit better than the Pontiac. It features 10 tons of armor and has a top speed of 64 kilometers per hour. So at 50 tons, the Hunchback does pretty much what the Victor does. It's also about 5 million Sea-Bills, Fox Creds less per. The engine is also easier to procure, easier to replace. There's spare parts for Hunchbacks just about everywhere, so if you're stuck somewhere, you can probably repair it a lot easier than you would a Victor. The main gun is mounted on the shoulder and not in the arm, so it is a little bit more protected as well. Inconvenience of the Hunchback compared to the Victor, it doesn't jump, so that is a fairly significant drawback, in my opinion there, but not one that is unsurmountable. And it has 1.5 tons less armor and an internal structure that's a bit more fragile since it's a smaller mech. So there's inconvenience to the Hunchback compared to the Victor, but you can basically get 2.5 Hunchbacks for the price of a Victor. And in a logistics chain kind of thing, the Hunchback is going to be the better mech. But I hear you say, I want an assault mech, not a medium mech. Well, jumping assaults are not rare nowadays. When the Victor came out, yes, it was a novelty, but in the end, by 3150, assault jumpers are fairly common. And we're just going to talk about something you can buy, not some odd clan design, not some odd SLDF relic, the very basic HGN Islander series. 10 tons heavier than the Victor, and it is slower, so you do have that on the Victor. The HGN series does have 4 tons of armor more, and it has a reliable set of firepower in most configuration, which combines missiles, ballistics, and laser. The standard off-the-floor model has a Gauss rifle, an LRM-20 rack, an RM-6 rack, and a pair of medium lasers. And that's your factory standard Islander. Of course, during the Succession War, the Gauss rifle was pretty much extinct, so there were downgraded versions of the Islander roaming around. There was one with an AC-10 and one with an AC-20, and both of them were not critically rare. They were unusual mechs and not the things that you would see on the front line as often, let's say as an Atlas or a Victor. But those were still common enough, and militaries could procure them if they had necessary factories. In my opinion, it would have been at the time a better purchase to get an Islander. Nowadays, it's still a better purchase to get an Islander most of the time, unless you have access to the Liu Bei Wing or Louis Bing or that other one. For final thoughts, for most of the Succession War, you used the mechs you had and you were happy about it. So the Victor was an assault mech that looked the part, did the part, and could stomp most of the opposition. Once you start looking at the other options out there, however, it just doesn't cut it as a role as an assault knife fighter or an assault cavalry unit. You've got better options in the same price range, cheaper, or at different positions. It'll do because it's there, but it's not the first thing you'll jump on. What makes the manufacturers really happy is that people actually enjoy the design, and the production lines are still in use to this day, so you can easily procure a Victor. So it's not a thing that is entirely out of the ordinary to see on the battlefield. So I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. I thank you for listening to me, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.